So fortunately, I was invited out to go watch This Beautiful Future that just finished its production on the Cherry Lane Theater. It was playing for about 6 weeks. I want to give a big thank you to Oliver and John for inviting me out to watch this show. So the play stars Francesca Carpinini and Yuli Schlesinger. Francesca plays Elodie, who is a 17-year-old French girl in France in 1944, and Yuli plays a 16-year-old named Otto, who is a German soldier. So the play pretty much follows these two characters in kind of like a makeshift house, almost in some ways, or a hideout, so to speak, and it spends about 80-90 minutes with them in terms of their intimate lives and kind of who they are, kind of explain themselves to each other and figuring out where they stand with their personal ideologies with the world at this time. So I'm going to start out with some positives of the show. So first of all, the Cherry Lane production of this show has a very, very, very warm and nice setting with the coloring of the show. It's a very simplistic play in terms of the props and what needs this show to kind of happen. You know, there's not really much to it besides a bed, pillows, some authentic clothing of the time period for the characters, like a prop gun, a little egg, some running water, and, you know, a little bit of other things, but nothing that anybody couldn't make a production out of, say, for colleges or, you know, other theater venues. And I actually think that is one of this show's strengths, because you have a very minimal budget or a minimal setting in terms of what this play needs. So there's a lot of creativity that needs to get forced. And what this production does, in particular this team, is they create a really warm setting for these characters, kind of as if you walk in and you feel as if you're immersed in Otto and Elodie's world. The colors are pink and blue and almost this purple tint at times, at least in my opinion. It's a really nice setting for these characters, because when you think of intimate settings, it's a few people and you want to feel welcomed in that area. And when you go into the theater, you really feel a sense of warmth. You feel a sense of you can kind of open up or feel free with these characters. It's just very soothing, the color palette. And I think that that's what this play really has going for it. You know, when I first walked in there, I imagined groups of people putting on this show as a production and saying, here's the tools you have and make something of a limited scale. And this production just has flying colors when it comes to creativity, because it's kind of one of those situations where less is more. And I'd say that this show is an A+ in terms of lighting and in terms of mood setting. It's extremely creative, and I really like those settings when low budget films or, say, lower budget theater can create so much without really doing so much in terms of bombastic changes. This is a really creative and interesting take where I think this production team was very peculiar and very precise with what they wanted, and I don't think anyone could really match this creativity where this production team did. I am struggling in a lot of ways to see this show transfer to Broadway, if it ever does, where this mood setting is not there with these colors. It was just really, really great seeing these characters interact, pillow fighting, or talking to each other within this setting, because you really felt a sense of warmth and a sense of compassion to them, even when they talk about who they are and what they want to be in life. You don't forget that they are essentially teenagers, that they are naive to the world around them, and it kind of creates a sense of hopefulness in a kind of dire setting. So Francesca, who plays Elodie, in my opinion, I think does a fantastic job, and she is one of those actors or actresses that when you see an actor perform, you kind of wish more casting directors would have her name on the list, or you think, wow, I want to kind of champion her more. I think she is fantastic and brings a really interesting flow to Elodie as a character. She pursues Elodie kind of as a girl who isn't afraid to speak her mind. She's very tender at first to Otto, and Francesca really leans into this sense of warmth to Otto. She's very compassionate and very caring towards him, but also at the same time wants to be herself in this world. She wonders about the world. She sees the world for what it is, but isn't afraid to find the best out of a bad situation. And Francesca really shows this when she leans in for a kiss in the beginning of the play to really show Otto about how she feels towards him. She's kind of unrelenting about being herself. She's bombastic in a fun way where she sees a situation of kind of bleakness and isn't afraid to kind of poke a bit of fun at it. There's a sequence in the beginning of the play where they need to stay quiet in their hideout, but Elodie says, I don't care, and she like flaunts herself to the passing bombers as a joke. But it's nice to see an actor kind of be so spontaneous and give that spontaneous energy to a crowd, especially when the times like this in 1944 are rather bleak and tiresome. She is a breath of fresh air, and I don't think a lot of actors bring that energy, unlike how Francesca did. Now, the only issue I kind of have with Elodie as a character is there are times that this is a period piece, and the script kind of makes her talk in some lines in the play as kind of like a modern teenager, and that contrast of what the piece is going for in the 40s versus sounding like someone now is a little jarring at times. It doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, it kind of pulls you out of the moment, and it's not the actress's fault at all. It's just the kind of pen to paper about what the playwright thinks is relatable, and I don't really think relating in terms of, oh, can a modern girl or a modern boy put themselves in Elodie's shoes? Well, most people aren't in their situation, so it's not about can we relate to them, it's more or less can we sympathize with them. And I don't really think having some certain sequences where she sounds almost like a kind of like, I won't say punk teen, but more of like a teen feels right. But that's kind of my only gripe with the character. There is another scene in the play where she and Otto first meet. She kind of makes fun of Otto for kind of like checking her out. She wants to hold his gun. She's very kind of flirtatious with the way she talks to him. And it's just really cute because she sees him for who he is. She sees him for face value and just says, hey, this guy looks kind of nice, I want to talk to him. There's just a fun sense of flirtatiousness that she gives to this role, and I don't see a lot of other actors doing it in the same way that Francesca does. It's just very, very sweet and kind of charming to see how she strides along the stage with Elodie. The only thing I wish Elodie had was a bit more depth and towards the end of the play, because of this time period, entangling or being in a relationship with a German soldier really kind of shuns girls from the French community. They get targeted as just kind of unfaithful to the country. A lot of these women got tarred or feathered, and just very tragic things that happen to these girls that in a lot of ways is undeserving. And what I wanted more from the play is to kind of see how this affected Elodie in the regard of, in an emotional standpoint, because you see her full of energy and full of life, and I think it would have been really interesting to see how a teenager in a lot of ways falls victim to the situation around them of the war, kind of grasps with a bit of emotional deterioration. There are hints of that towards the end of the play when both characters' stories resolve, but I just think this character was so endearing and so just played so wonderfully by Francesca that I did leave wanting more, and that's all, and that usually is a good thing. Wanting more from an actor, wanting more from the performance, because it shows that you're invested within the characters. So moving on to Otto, who's played by Yuli, I think that Yuli as an actor also does a great job in this show, and it's really hard for these two actors to do this show, you know, in terms of a one-man performance, for example, and then only having two actors on. Even though the show was not a one-man performance, but still having two actors run this whole gig, it's not easy, and especially being in a theater environment where it's live and then anything can kind of go wrong at any time. I do give credit to these actors for doing a performance like this. I definitely think Uli, in my opinion, is at his best and kind of has his best strengths when he is more self-reflective as Otto, and there are moments in the play when Otto is opening up to Elodie or is monologuing to himself, reflecting about what he has done in the war, about executing prisoners or following blind orders from superiors, and Uli brings a sense of compassion to Otto, where I think when he thinks to himself, it's very kind of like this childlike innocence where he doesn't really question anyone, his superiors, or anything around him, because he's convinced that they will always do what's best for him. Now, in the real world, what actually happened, which we all know, is, the genocide of the war. And it's really, I almost see myself in his monologues, seeing the rallies of, Hitler giving his speeches, or seeing Otto with his soldiers gunning down innocent civilians and just not understanding what others have issue with this, because he doesn't see the issue. He sees it more as we're doing the right thing because we're told that we're doing the right thing. And especially being so young and naive, he's not really questioning the world around him, or when he gets questioned, he's very emotional. He doesn't really know how to grasp logical thinking without emotion getting in the way. And that's where I think Uli does a great job, is being self-reflective and seeing his world very clear, but not understanding or getting a sense of criticism. And that's where I think this play is really strong, is when the characters, where Elodie and Uli open up and distance themselves from who they are. There's a pretty great sequence when Otto gets upset with Elodie for mentioning that the Germans are not going to push forward in the war, that they're actually retreating, and Otto is very stunned and confused about this, and gets really upset with Elodie that she mentions the BBC, almost in certain ways that mentioning the BBC is like contraband, that they're not allowed to say that because it's Allied propaganda. It's a really interesting setting where you see both of these characters who believe their truth, and seeing Elodie or kind of cower in the corner, not knowing if Otto's gonna hurt her, and Otto standing on the bed trying to almost be superior. It's an interesting piece of staging because you see the tenderness that Elodie wants to give Otto, but then the fear of maybe she doesn't really know who he is or what he can do to her. You want to think in these moments that you know that person, but this play kind of, in some ways, in my opinion, peels back those lines in scenes of the more dramatic areas of the play. But also where this play, in my opinion, succeeds and falters is the general pacing of the show. So within Elodie and Otto's story, there is a split between them and two older actors who do karaoke and reflect on their lives throughout the show. Now, I actually do think the actors who played the older couple do a really good job with their karaoke, and it's actually really sweet to watch them sing and reflect on who they are and their mistakes. But the only issue with this is it grinds the play to a halt. I guess what I'm saying is, when the play is with these two characters talking, Elodie and Otto, and then it cuts to karaoke with pop songs, it's a pretty jarring change, and I understand the intent of the playwright. It's to almost in a lot of ways see two older people reflecting on their life, and then seeing two young people like Elodie and Otto get their lives cut short in a lot of ways. I see the intention. I think in a lot of ways that's just me disagreeing with the structure of the writing or the structure of what the playwright was intending. I do personally believe that I think this play could have done without the karaoke and focused itself entirely on Otto and Elodie's feelings of distrust, feelings of warmth, feelings of, anger, jealousy, happiness to each other, and had that be the whole play from start to finish, and not really feel the need to kind of grind the play to a halt at times. No, that's just personal preference, and the only issue with the stopping and starting of the karaoke and the dramatic parts of the play is the story will change its setting, and that's okay because the story wants to do that. That's what is intended. But it makes for a bit of a disjointed and kind of jarring experience, because there are times towards the end of the play where the characters are no longer in the basement or the little hideout, but it's still staged there. So the actors have a very difficult task to have the audience see what's physically in front of them, but believe they're somewhere else. And that is a situation that I've seen, say, movies do that are lower budget in some ways, kind of fall victim to biting off more than they can chew. I do think that the right intention is there, but the execution is hard when you don't have the resources. And this is not the production of the show's fault. They're just doing what they're essentially told by the writing. It's just a situation where, in my opinion, as an audience member, you're going to buy it or you're going to reject it. The idea of not being in the basement, and the idea of these characters going other places or narrating what happens to them. So when Otto was giving his monologue about the situations he was in when he was in the firing squad of the army, it made me think about, and this is Yuli's performance, specifically where he's able to make an audience member think about something else is very powerful. It made me think about the book Cherry, where Nico Walker is in the Iraq War and comes home to rob banks to fuel his drug addiction that was essentially fueled by the traumaticness of the war in Iraq. And he has a dilemma where he doesn't quite understand what he's doing wrong robbing banks when in Iraq fellow soldiers were kicking down doors and harming civilians. He's almost narrating that he felt as if what he was doing over there was 10 times worse than what he was doing at home, but the government doesn't really care if, say, a Iraqi civilian gets killed versus a bank getting robbed. So it's kind of, this character is kind of caught in this ideology kind of conflict internally, and I really felt a sense of sympathy towards Otto, even though that what he was doing was wrong, and Elodie sees it that it's wrong. You feel a sense of that this is just a kid getting forced to do something that he doesn't quite understand the repercussions of. And for Nico in the book Cherry, he does tend to kind of grasp it a bit more because he's older, but it still doesn't really make the situation any better when the government says one thing but tells you to go do the other. You know what I'm saying? It's that sense of victim kind of blaming, or that sense of kind of seeing the victim as the perpetrator, but feeling that sense of sympathy. That, in my opinion, is where the writing is at its strongest, when it's creating sympathy for these characters. One of the only other issues I have with the show is there are certain scenes that I think I could almost cut out because they don't really feel super warranted, like when Elodie talks about a church getting bombed and how she didn't really like one of the people there, or there's a scene where I actually did kind of like where Otto pretends to be a cat and he dies. It's a little odd, but it's meant to be funny and to kind of I get the purpose of building these characters up and show that they are kind of like living and breathing people rather than just dramatic pieces. It's kind of creating the illusion that they are real people, and I get the purpose, but I really do like and think the play is at its best when it's not trying to be something else, like be a comedy in certain aspects, or be kind of out of this confined area, and it's at its best when the characters are really self-reflective, or they're trying to figure out each other without knowing each other, but get a sense that they believe in each other, that they can see themselves as a couple. Most of the issues are less of the production and just more of me disagreeing with some of the writing. I do think when it comes to any negative, you can always find a positive, and that's where I want to kind of give my last big positive of the show, is when I saw some of the pacing that I did not fully agree with in terms of the karaoke being the transitional parts of the play. What I did really like is seeing the play, when it did get cut, is seeing every individual scene for what it was. And what I mean by that is there are parts of the play where the characters are, where, you know, it's intended where it's invoking an emotion of, say, the characters want to try to do a bit of comedy, the characters need to have a heart-to-heart situation, the characters need to, you know, be teenagers and kind of fall in love. There's a scene for each part of that in this show. Seeing each sequence kind of get cut up in certain ways, I thought was really interesting, because the characters at one point have a pillow fight and it's really sweet, or they embrace for the first time having a bit of intimacy physically. You know, I think that, in my opinion, is where I could imagine so many other actors wanting to choose this play to act in front of classes or maybe scene studies and kind of shine. I do believe that's where this play is at its best. It's when you can imagine yourself or others performing bits and pieces of this show and seeing 20 different actors, like couples, do this scene in 20 different ways. You don't really get that a lot from shows, imagining yourself at times about how you would do this, until maybe you study it. When I was watching This Beautiful Future, I was constantly seeing myself or seeing other people, their interpretations of scenes. But that can only be done when the actors are giving such a convincing performance that you kind of think to yourself, you know what, I wonder how others would do this. And that's where I think this play is truly at its best. Judging the show right now of what I witnessed and what the material actually is, I do think it is a solid play. I do think that there is a lot to like here. I just think that there is a lot where some people may or may not fully agree with. I do think Francesca and Uli do a great job with these characters. I really adore the color palette of this show. I love the intimacy that the show brings, the sense of compassion it wants you to feel for these characters, and I don't think that anyone can walk out of the show not feeling a sense of love towards these characters, because they are characters who are caught in a bad situation, who are just trying to still be true to themselves and their morals and kind of what they want to be towards this world. And that's my review for This Beautiful Future. I want to thank again the Cherry Lane Theater for inviting me out to review the show, and I hope to see you all soon.